Hi guys, it's Jamie here, and in this week's Art Tribe tutorial I would like to combine two things that we've been looking at. One is our colour palette challenge, and you can see here I'm looking at that colour palette and selecting some pouring paints and also some pattern papers that I think will match the palette closely enough. I am undecided at this stage whether I'm going to paint some papers and create my own prints or use some pre-existing papers that are already printed. The reason for this debate is already in the past week in Art Tribe we've had a tutorial on creating our own collage papers and then doing a landscape using those papers, and we've also looked at 4 famous collage artists. Romare Bearden, who was known for his depiction of African American life during the mid-20th century. Through his art, he brought attention to the plight of the African American people, and at a time when prejudice was more prevalent, he highlighted that his community was as vibrant, loving, hard-working as any community within the USA. Henri Matisse, the famous painter whose life was affected by illness, and he turned to brightly coloured cut-out collage as a way to still express his artistic nature. Kurt Schwitters, who during the 1930s and 40s used his collage to express political statements, and he used everyday scrap papers in his collage, which was highly influenced by the short-lived Dadaism art movement. And Hannah Hock, who was not only influenced by Dadaism and also around during Nazi Germany. You can see within her work Empowered Females, where she added very surrealistic touches to her collages. As you can see, I have decided to create some of my own printed papers. I'm using these Indian ink stamps that I purchased from Amazon and mixing my colour palette so that the papers have contrast colours on them. The reason I am creating some of my own papers is that I have decided to try and combine the colour challenge with the collage cutout art style of Matisse. I have provided you some links to some supporting materials in the video description, which you can reach when you start to read the video description. Press the little downward arrow. The extra support materials I've provided you with are some pictures from Matisse cutout collage, the colour palette challenge that we're using, and some silhouettes which will become apparent later in the tutorial. Also within the drop-down video description you will find links to our low-cost monthly Art Tribe membership group, which has some exclusive tutorials, mini blogs and inspiration from like-minded people, links to our Creator Club shop, and of course links to my coffee jar or tip jar. As you will have noticed, these tutorials are advert free, and any tips which is purely voluntary anyone would like to give via Ko-fi goes towards all this equipment that I need to make both junk journal and art tutorials. While I was happy using the Indian ink stamps, I realise not everyone will have those or wants to go to the expense of buying them. Therefore, this time I'm creating my pattern paper using a makeup sponge and a mandala stencil. I also wanted to use some everyday objects rather than ink stamps and stencils, so that if you have limited supplies you can still take part in this colour challenge or the Bright Matisse challenge. In this section of the tutorial I'm using the fuchsia paint against the slightly pearlised green and different size circles to create a printed paper. With this paper I did end up adding more and more circles, but actually I was really pleased with the final printed sheet. Here I've torn and scrubbed out some cardboard so that I can reveal the ridges in the cardboard box, and I'm going to use that as an ink stamp. As you can see, I'm giving it a good rub on, and I'm actually pleasantly surprised by the result. So I reapply the paint and decide that I'm going to cover the whole paper with this stripy cardboard. Obviously, I'm not going to waste any leftover paint, so I just quickly brush any excess over some plain copy paper, and those will just be added to the collage papers that I made the other day for future use. I have provided you with a page of silhouettes. I'm chosen to use the pig silhouette, and as you can see, I'm not tracing it exactly. I'm leaving a small border as I follow that silhouette shape round, so that when I cut it out, it goes back to the original size. I do cut this fairly carefully with a small pair of sharp scissors, but I do cut inside of the silhouette that I've drawn and actually make some decisions to slim down the pig in some areas and create a bigger tummy. I noticed on the original silhouette the legs were quite spindly, so I'm taking quite a bit off my outline on the legs. And while my cutting skills aren't up to giving the pig a curly tail, I certainly attempt to give him a much slimmer tail. I have decided that this piece is going to go into my commonplace book. I've already measured the page to decide how big I want my piece to be, and I'm going to use this stripy paper as my base piece. I've had a quick look at some of the Matisses and have decided to replicate his banding that he does on some of his collages. You will find copies of the Matisse pieces that I was looking at in your link, and you will see why I'm cutting strips of this circle paper. He has a piece that has a stripe down the centre and a fern shape. Therefore, I'm using that as inspiration. Here I'm roughly cutting out the mandala because I notice in his horse cutout he has some corner pieces on his collage, so I'm going to use my mandala to get the same effect by cutting it in half and placing it in opposite corners. I am just using a Pritt stick at this stage to add my pieces to the base, and I decided to go for that central stripe as well as the two borders. And here you can see me adding my corner pieces, which will be trimmed off when they are dry. I'm using the pre-printed paper that I showed you at the very beginning of the video, and I'm carefully cutting round the little white flowers that are on that sheet of paper. Having cut out the two designs of the white flowers from the pre-printed, I also went back to my fuchsia pink and teal and cut out the remaining flowers that I'd stamped. And now we are simply going to assemble the piece together. The only thought I put into the placing of the flowers was the colours and the sizes, and maybe grouping some on top of the other, taking some off the edge of the page. Of course, when I come to glue them down, I don't exactly go where I scattered them over in the first place, and that's when I layer a few more together. So here it is, our Matisse-inspired cutout collage with our own printed papers and also some papers from scrapbooking, using this week's colour palette for the colour palette challenge. Leave me a like and comment if you enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you very, very soon.